Hello, everybody. Not expected to meet today. Not expected to do a show today, but yesterday was only one of the biggest days in Seahawks franchise history. One of the biggest days that this team has ever seen. And this is a team that has seen a Super Bowl. This is a team that has seen NFC championships. This is a team that has seen some of the highest of the highs and the lowest of the lows and the most interesting of the most interesting moves you can make as an NFL team. But yesterday, it just hit a little bit different, and we have to talk about it. And I know we've been talking about it for about 30 hours now. I know every single Seahawks fan has been thinking about this nonstop, and we're still not done. We're still not done thinking about it. There is so much to think about, so much to talk about, so much to go into. And we got to do it together for at least one stream. So I am joined by Brandon of the Hawk's Nest, the hardest working man on YouTube. How you doing tonight, Brandon?
Doing good. I feel like a day after this move was made, it's an encouragement, and I still feel really good about it. It was a bittersweet day yesterday in a lot of respects, but the the outcome of it and where this organization is going in the future is, to me, Brendan, nothing but bright. I don't know where you were standing in your outlook and the videos that you're going to have to make this offseason, absent, of course, draft or free agency, that we're going to be about this team and what you saw in this team. When you looked at the coverages, when you looked at the offense, when you looked at all of these things and started to try to, talk about it with your audience and how this is going to get better, how this is going to improve, how this is going to reach to a contender state. And from my perspective, moving into this offseason with the potential of Carroll here, I'd be interested to see if you were in the same place. I just felt like I would have a hard time in so many of those type of videos drumming that up when I wasn't sure it existed.
So you would say that you're excited and optimistic about the future of this team from here?
Way more so than I think I was going into this offseason with what we had in place. I just don't think it was not as much just a matter of things were broken prior. It was that it was hard to, it didn't feel like you're going to have to kind of like just hope it magically fixed itself to go forward, because it didn't seem like internally there was the drive to, fix it, in my opinion. And I know this starts us off on a bit of a bent with this, but that's the thing that I was kind of running into when I was looking at this offseason personally.
It was going to be difficult. It was going to be difficult to imagine the team being great with the current regime. They could have been good. They could have been pretty good. They could have been okay. Could have been average like they've been the last couple years. But being great, that's hard. That's hard to imagine.
Yeah.
So with this move does come a lower floor, of course. There is something to be said about the fact that without Carroll, your floor has been kind of removed. And now the possibility of a really bad season is on the table in a way that I don't think it really was with Carroll.
Agreed.
But you now have that ceiling removed, and I think there's a chance to be great again.
Well, it comes back to that eternal question that was always posed here through the Carroll regime by many different fans alike. And they would say, especially the pro folks of Coach Carroll, who would say that there is a value in consistently winning, even though it does not take you over the top. You never really, get to the highest mark, but you at least are in sort of the dance. And they would say, well, what's better? 10 years of mostly getting in the playoffs, mostly being a good team. And by mostly, 8 out of 10 seasons, you're in the playoffs and you're at least in there. Maybe you win a game or two within there as well. Or to, have a 10-year period where maybe 7 of those years are bad years, Brendan, 3-year wins, 4 winning wins, bad football. But one of those seasons you get to the Super Bowl, maybe you have a 2-year run within it where you're in the playoffs. What is the better track from a fan's standpoint? And I feel like I'm in it here for Super Bowls and trying to raise Lombardi, and that's what matters most. And while consistent winning is nice, there is nice, and then there is what is the ultimate goal. And the ultimate goal is what we should be aspiring to, and I would take the latter. Where do you stand on that?
Well, as a fan, it's a no-brainer. I think it's an absolute no-brainer. To me, the idea of being better off just being okay every year is from an owner's perspective. As an owner, you might prefer that because as long as you're okay, you can kind of string the fan base along, right? You can say, hey, we're just one move away from the Super Bowl because we're 8-8. One move, we make the playoffs, and then we were gonna, if we make the playoffs, we're gonna beat all these teams on the road and go to the Super Bowl and win it. Just one more move. Just keep on coming. Keep on coming. You can string them along forever. That's what Jerry Jones did for a long time, and it worked.
Agreed.
And if the Cowboys had ever gone like 2-14 or something like that, there's no stringing anybody along. So I do think that from an ownership perspective, you're making the most money if you just hang around in the middle. But from any other perspective, I'd much rather aim for the top of the mountain.
Have you not, though, as I've heard, and it's been surprising for me, Brendan, because this is something that I've heard doing my channel through the years in these debates and discussions that come up. I've heard internally from people, though, that find themselves where it's not a no-brainer, who they say, I would take the A. I'll choose A. I don't want B. I want to have come care every single year for what's going on with the team. And that's where it surprised me a little bit here in some of my discussions, not recently over this couple-day period, but just in the years in discussing Carroll and what was going on with the team, was a lot of fans feeling in that mode of, no, this is perfectly fine. This is absolutely good. I'm okay. We win every year. We win more than we lose. We're in the playoffs more often than we're not. That's so. And I just think it does come down to a bit of a choice between those two camps as a fan and where you stand. And it does seem like there's two sides on that. Whereas I feel like once before, it's like everybody was in more just, we're trying to get Super Bowls. That's what we're trying to do. And if you have to have a few bad seasons in there to suffer through that, to get to that spot, then that's the process. And that's just part of the process you got to embrace.
Right. So Seahawks fans are falling on one side of the fence or the other on this issue over the last 30 plus hours. But it sounds like we're both pretty firmly on the side of the fence of this was the right thing to do, right?
Very much so. I get the swell of emotions and all of that. And, but at the end of the day, this is the choice that was the right decision. And right decisions are sometimes not always easy. Sometimes there is pain. Sometimes there is sadness associated with them. But that doesn't make them not the right decision.
Right. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack here. I want to go through a few different angles on this from you. And the first one, I'm going to let this first super chat kind of do the talking for me, because we've got one that leads directly into what I was going to lead with. Coda Dad, thank you for the $10 Canadian. Got to be worth at least 35 cents here. I think yesterday signals that Jody Allen is not planning on selling the team for at least 4 to 5 years. So the first thing that I thought when this news was handed down concerned Jody Allen. And first of all, I guess we were just kind of wrong about her. I guess we just whiffed. I guess we didn't have the right impression of her if she's willing to do something like this 2 years after greenlighting the Russell Wilson trade. Maybe we were wrong about her, first of all. Second of all, maybe we're also wrong about an imminent sale. Like the team's going to be sold, but maybe we were wrong about the timeline, because this is not the move that an owner who is planning on leaving skid marks as she sells the team in 14 months or what's the no, it's actually not even that. It's later this year, right?
After spring, technically.
Yeah, after spring. Like, this is not the move that an owner who is thinking along those lines would necessarily make. So where are you with Jody Allen right now?
Well, I am as high on Jody Allen as I've been since she took over her ownership. And it has not always been certain to me that she's not hands-on, but there's been a lot of evidence to point to maybe this was more about just getting to the sale. And I think the recent years, it kind of started, I think, with the Russell Wilson trade, where she suddenly kind of came on the scene and said, okay, well, let's be an active hand here in how we're doing it. We heard reportedly at that time that Carroll had some of the tower, and it's important, of course, because you were with me on this when we reported this at the time. It was being reported in the background that some of the power and the title was being taken back away from Carroll, that Schneider was being able to handle a little bit more specifically of the drafts and make that happen. And so that in itself was an acknowledgement at that time, not only to make that Russ trade, which was one of the biggest trades in NFL history, and to have an owner step up to be willing to make that call, but also the potential recognition of it, which this tracks now as we stand 2 years later with what's happened to Carroll, that she also was not just coming in to take a look at the Russ situation to make the hard call on that, but to assess the whole situation as to what was going around all the way around on this one, including what was going on with Carroll. How was his bed being made? And I don't think she came out the other side of that saying it was rumple free. I don't think he was getting that hotel type sharpness there on the edges. And so she said, okay, you got the kind of, like I said at that time, Brendan, the reset. You've got your time to reestablish your culture, reestablish what you need to do. And I think you got a couple of years here ahead of this spot. And she comes back to her and relooks at it and goes, okay, not. But to take this firm of action, it surpasses even the Russell Wilson call. it's more evidence of her active ownership and that she cares, Brendan. The reports we're hearing that she is trying to assemble an ownership group, which I sometimes wonder if it's going to end up being a group that maybe even incorporates even former players who've also talked about wanting to own the team. And that, she's trying to kind of prolong a little bit of the sale, because every time, 3 or 4 years go by on an NFL franchise, you can strap on another $500 million to the overall value. So, that's people a lot of times on this have gotten caught up with the coaching needing to be in place, or that there's a big thing with having Carroll here because that adds value to the franchise. I think that that's incorrect. I think that franchises value-wise sell for about $500 million incrementally more, and it rises naturally with it if there's like a 2 or 3 year span where the franchises haven't been sold, and that's what determines the value of the next franchise. So her merely waiting, adding, let's say, if she waits till 2027, 2028, adding another $500 million on, that is part of that goes into her pocket, which helps her establish her egg to then go and buy the team back essentially as part of the ownership group. And is she going to deny to herself? Even if a guy like Bezos comes in and he's got his big wallet, what's to stop her from saying that, a part of this is a key part, Brennan. What's to stop her at that point of the will saying, you need to make sure who you're selling to is going to keep the team in Seattle, and her to be able to arbitrarily pull the card to say, I don't know if Bezos would keep him in Seattle. So therefore I'll sell to the second ownership group, my ownership group. Mm-hmm. And then we'll own the team at that point. So I feel like this is kind of showing some lines to that, especially with her care that she's put into the team the last 2 years in these decisions and how she's had to make them. And so I love what she's done here. I obviously, both you and me were calling for it. I think that it's the proper decision, and it's going to be what's best for this franchise in the long term.
Yeah, and I would wonder what her thought process was that led to this. I would wonder what was the chain of thoughts and considerations that she made to make this firing, because it wasn't just based off record, right? She didn't just check the newspaper one day, see that we've gone 9-8 the last 2 years, and go, okay, I'm going to fire him now because of this. There was something deeper there. It was something deeper than just, I had one of my aides tell me the Seahawks went 9-8 again, and from that I made a decision to let him go. If that was all that went into the decision, she'd probably choose to keep him. Like, is there some understanding of like, well, his defense has been bad for 2 years and really, really bad for 2 years in a row now? Is there some understanding on her part that even though the current place of the team is not bad, it's not trending in the right direction? What do you think brought this about from her perspective?
I do think 2 years ago, there was some controlled wrestled away for Carroll, and that you talk about a person going from maybe not having a microscope on a given, she's got a lot of irons in the fire, obviously, with all of the items within the trust she has to look over, especially in liquidating. And so, there's this thing area of like, well, your microscope's not on this given part of this entire trust here. But that 2 years ago, by taking those duties off with the trade, I think that drew a little bit more of the view on Carroll, and to put him under that microscope and what was going on. And the thing that I've harped on and you've harped on last 2 years is we haven't seen change. Say nothing of establishing your culture. The change that Coach Carroll talked about, which was necessitated 2 years ago, and that he spoke on at the Combine 2 years ago, was never enacted. I've said that you can look at the defense and find a cosmetic way to say that there's been a change here. You can say, well, there's this 2-man fronts with the outside linebackers, and there's instead of cover 3, now cover 4, cover 6, but the bottom line of it is that really the base important things within defense that you look to have changed down the line didn't get changed. And that being the case, that microscope, no change 2 years later, I think this is, again, all evidence to her watching this situation very closely, and most importantly, truly caring, that it's not just a piece of an item in the will, that it's not just a thing she has to deal with and get rid of when it's convenient to finally get it out, but something that she actually, does care about. And in my opinion, is honoring Paul Allen's memory in these steps. And that's also probably a bit of a guiding light here on this, a North Star, if you will.
So very interesting couple of days for her. My perspective on her has changed dramatically. And it's my understanding that John Schneider and Jody Allen are spearheading the new head coach search, which also kind of speaks volumes about her level of interest here, if she's really involved to that degree.
Mhm. It's evidence that mounts, right? It all starts to have signs pointing to one direction, which is not a hands-off owner or one, like I said, that's just biding her time, but instead one that is truly invested in this team's future and seeing this future be a bright one. And that in itself, beyond letting Coach Carroll, in my opinion, go, is the most important thing here, Brendan, because to get to championships is the thing I've been trying to push against with those folks that were so pro Carroll to the end degree, to the final day, to the 25th hour. And the thing I kept trying to push to them was that you keep telling me the winning culture here was established with Coach Carroll's arrival, and that's just incorrect. It was established with Paul Allen buying the team in '97. That's when you
Absolutely.
started to win. And so ownership is where it begins with. From ownership gets to coaches, gets to players. Or I guess you go from ownership, from general manager, you get to coach, you get to players, however you want to put it. But it starts at that point. And if you don't have the strong ownership in place that's actively doing the things that's necessary, then it doesn't matter what you're doing down the line. Doesn't matter how good the coaches are. Doesn't matter what the moves the maestro of a general manager is making. It will all be unseated to that point by bad ownership. And so we've got good ownership in place now. She's shown last year, Brendan, with the conversion of the base to bonus, she's willing to spend. We put out the biggest free agent contract in the team's history last year to Dre'Mont Jones. She's showing she's willing to spend. She's showing she's willing to make go forward moves like this year with the second round pick that didn't work out, but again, at least shows the willingness to be aggressive and have a go forward approach. And certainly you can look at that move in retrospect, Brendan, of if you did have Carroll under that microscope, you were trying to give him everything that he could. You made the biggest deal at the trade deadline of any NFL team out there to help buoy up his team, to help give him a final coup de grace down the season to take him over the top to help him sustain his job. And it did not provide that.
Right. So yeah, thank you, Coda Dad, once again for the donation. So another element going on here is the fact that Pete Carroll is not. He was fired, but he also wasn't fired because he's still here. He's still here in an advisory role. And I want to know what you think about that, because that could mean a lot of different things. That could be he's going to be an assistant to the general manager and actually have a lot of say in roster building. Or it could mean it's like when Disney bought Star Wars and George Lucas was brought on as an advisor and he didn't do anything.
Right.
We see that all the time, right? Like Steven Spielberg has his name on 100 movies a year as an executive producer, and he's not doing anything with 99% of those movies. He just puts his name on it. Like, what do you see Pete doing in this front office in that role?
My bold prediction on this is that Coach Carroll is going to be hired to a coaching job this offseason. So I don't believe that there's going to be any role that he's even faced with of what it is, or whether he's doing something or just here as sort of a figurehead. I think that his quote about Bud Grant, rivers to wade and mountains to climb and waves to surf, and that's things that he said a couple different times throughout the press conference were certainly indicative of the fact that he doesn't feel done and that he feels he can do this. And some team out there is, I've the more I've thought about it, frankly, I know that Harbaugh gets connected to the LA Chargers, but at this point, I mean, it just starts to feel more and more like the Chargers move here will be to go and take Pete Carroll and bring him in. I mean, that's, and from Carroll, it's like you're back to Southern California. You complete the circle on your coaching career success. You have Herbert in place. They could probably get Carroll in there in LA without having to cede over a lot of, player control, like general manager like control, like they would with Harbaugh potentially. And so I put all that together and go, that just makes a lot of sense for that to go down and have happen. And we'll see what he can do. I still think he's going to bring with him his philosophies, and even having Herbert there, LA will come to find that absent them just stacking a hugely talented roster around him, that there are some things that, yes, he brings a culture, he brings a great attitude. He has been able to motivate men to a great degree, but there are probably things that are going to run into. So I don't think it's going to be something we cross. If he does remain here, Brendan, probably going to be a minor consultant kind of role at most. I don't think he would be active in any way.
The George Lucas.
The George Lucas, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And they're throwing out all of the Carroll extended universe. So
yeah. And then when they interview him about the current direction of the Seahawks, all he'll do is complain about how he doesn't like it.
Why you want me to go? What do you want me to do? I had to make a call, $4 billion.
Exactly. I've heard conflicting things on whether or not we would have to trade him or not. Greg Bell said earlier that we don't, that he's just free to leave. But I've heard some people say, so as near as I can tell, we don't trade him. But that's interesting thought.
Yeah, it's such a ridiculous thought that they would trade him. And people are, it's one of those things like, you're not wrong. You're just an a-hole if you're trying to kind of say that he's going to be traded by the Hawks or you're saying the Hawks are going to be an a-hole because they've come to this situation. We've got Pete at his presser, end of season presser, where he's like, yeah, I intend to be back. He has full confidence he's coming back. It's obvious then the next meeting he got blind swiped by the team on sort of them. I'm guessing what went down, Brendan, is they said, okay, change is going to happen. You're giving up coordinators. You're giving up coordinator control, and you can still remain. And I think Coach Carroll was like, I don't want to do that. And that led to that. But that was essentially at that point kind of a firing more than this mutual parting of ways at that point. He still would like to be the Seahawks head coach. So you can't really do that to a coach. Say, we don't want you to be the coach anymore. But we do have you under contract. The team will give him his golden parachute and then give him his. This is what you would do with a legend. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You don't do a guy that's been so good to you in that way. You let him have the freedom to go where he wants to go. This ain't Russell Wilson. We're not sitting on some dead money in our cap and there's price to be paid. And he's marching our way out of 10. This guy wanted to be here. So you don't bring that. Even if you could, you wouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because obviously the Chargers thing is the thing that's on everybody's mind. Like he would love it there. I think they would probably like it. Although I will say this, that is maybe the worst ownership situation in football. Like that is as bad as it gets. So I don't know if he would even like that. Like that, he might be miserable there because of the ownership. I don't know.
You also go through and you look at the available places that are out there, Brendan, though. Does he want to go out to the East Coast? He's been a West Coast guy for 20 plus years. And if you look at the viable options of jobs that are out there, Commanders, Patriots, Atlanta, it's all jobs out in the East Coast. And does he want to really go out into that area? And then also got to factor in from his standpoint, he's got Herbert there. I mean, that's the most talented quarterback that you could make an argument he has ever had, absent maybe Carson Palmer, or at least back to Palmer. So it's been many years since he's had a guy like that can sling the rock back there like that. That might be very, very, very enticing to him.
Right. Yeah. Let's see here. So that's most of the stuff concerning Carroll. Hey, it was a great ride. It was a lot of fun, but it hasn't been so fun lately. And I'm excited to see what comes next. That's really what I can say about it. I know there have been people out there who have gotten a lot more emotional about this than I have. And I kind of get it, but that's not really how I'm perceiving this this current situation.
Yeah, I mean, it was a little bit when I started my show up yesterday for the live stream. You were feeling a little bit of the weight of it a bit, but at the same point in time, it's again, I think you can do both things where you can balance a little bit of the appreciation and that this is a tough thing, but at the same time, understanding it is, the right thing. And I mean, the thing with you and I on this is that we can't go back to this and be speaking about this being the proper step. As hard as this is, we got to get this done. This has to happen. And then come back here after it happens and sit there and start to wallow in tears. This is what we wanted to have happen. This is what we drove to have happen. And we trust our assessment of the situation for why it was the right approach. And that's not, I can't pull a lot of sadness from that at that point when it's at the end of the day, this is who we're rooting for. This is what we're rooting for. I love the coaches. I love the players. I love what Coach Carroll said about honoring the players after they retire. I think everything he said with that was on point and true, and the NFL should certainly put that out into play in the NFL. Absolutely, they should. But at the end of the day, coaches come, players come, they go. This remains the same. And so this is what I'm going to always care most about. And this future of this is what's going to matter most beyond any of what's there individually. And in that place, if the right moves got made, even as hard as it may be, it'll be painful. And you know what? This isn't for those folks of us who have been longtime Hawk fans. There's been a lot of sad moments. There's been a lot of tough moments. But, when Largent retired at the end, the body was breaking down. He had a lot of years on it. My favorite player all time. But the time had come. And it was the right decision on his part to make. And that's hard as hell for me as a young kid, Talking about having tears as a young kid. But that's the way that this goes.
Absolutely. Okay, so one other element of this whole firing, and I am calling it a firing, even though this team has done everything they can to make it feel like it's not. It
Mm,
ultimately was, I think, in
yeah.
essence, if not in if not technically, then in effect, it's a firing. John Schneider stays. John Schneider stays and is going to get to run the show for at least a year here. And I got to tell you, I am really excited about that part of it because he deserves it. John Schneider deserves a chance to run the team on his own, call the shots, get his own coach, completely have control of the draft process, and build his team his way for as long as we let him. I'm really excited for him about this.
I am as well. I think that when we come to looking at some of the bad decisions or bad drafts through the years, along with the great drafts, it's oftentimes hard to exactly pinpoint one or the other because Carroll, through the majority of that time, did have the power over John. He could come in randomly and say, "Oh, that's your guy you want to draft here? Yeah, that's great. You're drafting this guy. Oh, that's the guy you want to sign in free agency? Sweet, you're signing him." And he had that power to make that call at all times. I don't think that Carroll came in there like a dictator, you know, goose stepping his way through the office and ordering what to do. But at the same point in time, I think that there was some hindering of Schneider through the years in his ability to enact his vision as a general manager, how pretty what 30 other general managers in the National Football League are able to enact their vision. And while Carroll, I'm sure early on that might have been a little bit of benefits for especially Brendan with Carroll's background and the college players he'd done and gone to their homes and recruited them on the recruiting trail. So he had some intimate knowledge on some of these guys. But I think with time as that went further and further down, it was more to John's advantage on his outlook and understanding of those guys because he had his scouts rolling it and working it. So I'm sure the scouts in the building, are probably going to like this at point because they're going to really get to run their job now fully and just target the guys that are the best. And we'll see how that goes. It'll be fun to watch how this changes or moves. And do we see some of these moves that you have a good move, and then this wild ass move that doesn't make mistakes? A great draft, and then this weird thing comes out of nowhere that doesn't seem to fit the form to what John Schneider does and who he is. We'll see on that. But he's under the barrel now too, like you say, out of that shadow, but now in the crosshairs because now you are going to be held responsible for these moves. Now you can't just put the blame out there on Coach Carroll as the end all be all scapegoat. You're going to have to stand tall in this storm and you got to go find a great coach. But you got a great team. He's put a great team together. The last two drafts have been fantastic. And I am excited to see he's earned the right to do this, like you said.
Mhm. And I think it's fair to say that his presence in this front office going forward is going to keep a decent amount of the roster intact. This is not a blow it up situation because Schneider's had a hand in building this team. He likes most of this team, probably, especially the young guys
Mm,
like Mafe, Walker, Cross, Lucas, Witherspoon, these guys who have been really good young players over the last couple years. I think they're relatively safe and not going anywhere. I think a guy like Uchenna is safe. Metcalf probably safe. A lot of these guys that in a full reload, full rebuild might be gone are going to be kept in place because of the retaining of Schneider, I believe. Do you agree with that?
yeah, I believe that's would be the case. I think there's certain players like we could probably target him pretty quickly, but I think those guys, I don't think he's going out here to clear house. In fact, I think that there's going to be a lot of a thought process into this offseason, Brendan, that you can get this thing more than needing to be rebuilt in a low end way, that you actually have a talent in place to be able to more maximize that talent and be better really quickly. That's a guess, of course, but just a feeling I have, and we'll see if it does go down that line. But if it was that feeling, Brendan, of course, you do less trimming and snipping and cutting at that point. You do more of retaining on the interior.
Yeah, I think you will see anybody on a rookie contract is safe, except for Eskridge, I guess, but he was never going to be safe anyway. So that doesn't really matter. I think Metcalf and Nwosu are relatively safe, even though they're on bigger contracts because they're really good and
Mhm.
clearly still able to be part of a long-term and short-term plan because
Yeah,
they're really good and not that old, by the way. I think they're both like what, 26?
that's right. Uchenna might be hit at 27, but he's still that's at the oldest because he came in the league super young.
Right. Guys like Gino and Lockett, I think could go one way or the other. I think they're likely to stay because the savings aren't big, but I could kind of see it going the other way. I could. if the new coach comes in and is like, I can't work with that guy, I think there is going to be some give and take, and Schneider might be willing to give a little bit on some guys like that.
I think I think Geno and Lockett could be two different points. I think with Geno, it's more that you probably keep him because of this is where Geno did kind of the smart thing. It's like in signing that low end contract and having the cap hit where it kind of is, and then where it's kind of where it's at. It's like it wasn't up at 39 million, right? If you had Geno up at 39 million and you had the $18 million dead money, you're like, well, I mean, that's a lot of money to save there. We probably with new coach got to do that, but at 31 with the $18 million of dead money, if you're going to do it, it's like, well, if we're going to move off, we got to move off with something then that makes sense to do that in this year. That doesn't just make sense to just do it for the sake of doing it. And I think it eventually is going to open the door up for the next coach to do the same thing Carroll would have done. And what Schneider, I think, intends to do here, which is you do retain Geno, and then you are going to get a young quarterback. And it becomes not an either or, but a both situation. And then you get into next year, Brendan. And at that point, you want to move off from Geno or even trade him at that point, you've got some options if the youngster is ready to go, rather than, riding with one guy, riding or dying one guy, and it's kind of on his shoulders to do it or not. And so I think Geno stays. Lockett, little complicated because I had forgotten about with Lockett when I've been thinking about this dead money thing with him about the post June 1st. Schneider could certainly go a little bit scorched earth on the post June 1st stuff, right? Jamal Adams, Tyler Lockett, Quandre Diggs, Dre'Mont Jones. He'd create and push a lot of dead money into the future of that. But he would have, if he wants to go crazy town, he could go that route if he does want to. So that's all I think a little bit in play, but I think you do retain Lockett because he is a net plus to this team. I think that you just have a new coach coming in and he goes, who's a benefit? Who isn't? Lockett, captain, just you can rely on him for almost 1,000 yards a season for the receiving position. Is it a little expensive for that? What you're paying him? Yeah. But at the same point in time, you get to next year and it's a little bit like the Geno thing. Now rather than having to do a premature year in the release and cut of those guys, you wait until really what would be the right time. In Lockett's case, I think that's probably retirement after next year.
Yeah, I lean towards both guys coming back next year, but I think it's more possible now than it was before that they are not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a fair way of putting it. Absolutely.
Yeah. There's some guys who are just slam dunks. Adams, Diggs, they're gone, out the door. They may as well make their plans now. Ballore, easy, no problem, no doubt about it.
Mm-hmm.
I think Dre'Mont is 50-50. I can't get a read on that situation. It depends on who we hire and how that person perceives that player. Like if it's somebody like, imagine if it's Evero, the guy who got good stuff out of Dre'Mont Jones in Denver, he might feel like I want to keep my guy, but if it's somebody else, maybe not.
It's a good point. It is a very good point. And he's going to be a tough evaluation too, Brendan, because he had to also be kind of the good soldier and going out and aligning outside for you. And he can come back and go, okay, I had 4.5 sacks on the year, but I had to be the good soldier and align out in this position that I don't play normally. And I think there is a good chance Dre'Mont remains because I think, Brendan, there is a good chance that they do hold on to the 3-4 defense with the next defensive coordinator they bring in. And he, of course, fits that because you have the outside rushers in Uchenna and Mafia already here with Derek Hall. That these guys all are best at sort of standing up. I think this does kind of lead them a little bit into that direction of him having a better chance to stay with that because of that.
All right. So with all that being said, with all that conversation out, I now want to turn the focus to the big topic right now, which is the next coach. Who is the next coach going to be? And Dotrick with the super chat here. Thank you for the $5. He kind of introduces the topic. With the new coach, are you both ready for he only did well with Pete's team if he wins, and this firing was a massive mistake if he loses? Yeah, it's coming.
I mean, Dotrick, there's a collection of guys on both of our channels that come into our chats that are going to want to sit there and try to, the second this thing isn't an absolute smashing success, they're going to be like, see, I hope you're happy with what you got with. Now we're in the dark ages. Thanks, guys. That's coming as a hair trigger thing on this one way or the other. And I'm prepared for it. I don't care. Yeah, I'm sure that if Schneider doesn't get the success, people will say, well, it was really Pete doing it. That's going to be the nature of things for sure. And the firing is a mistake, but here's the thing with that is that in doing this for a long time, man, Dotrick, and this is something I've learned in the last 4 years doing these shows every week, all the time, is just people will have a dog in the fight And that dog then prevents them from really looking at the situation with anything that even approaches trying to be unbiased. We all have biases, but do you try to be unbiased? Do you try to be subjective in your objective in your approach rather than subjective? And I think that I just have seen so many subjects through the years, from Russell Wilson and Coach Carroll and where the team, that I see people that will stand on a point and then they remain on that point and there's no movement to it. There's no even slight adjustment, even with new material. I have still people to this day on the Russell Wilson thing who will come into my chat who made an argument out of him 2 years ago. And then every step of the way I've pushed back on it, they've been wrong. And then they still come back 2 years ago and there's not an inch of movement on their standpoint on the issue. Right. Mm-hmm. It's like, I've been right these last 2 years. It's like, I told you he's gone in 2 years in Denver. I told you it was going to mistake there. I told you the Sean Payton thing wasn't going to work. And every time you're telling me I'm an idiot and and it's like, that's what you've seen. So you kind of come when you start to understand the nature of the beast and doing this game. From my perspective, Brendan, you just start to understand a lot of this is just, that's the people's love of Carroll and the bias is built in, and they're not really free thinking this much. It's not because I disagree with them. It's because I see this evidence of you stagnant in your approach, where you get new data and you don't move off of it. You can't sit here at this point, look at the Russell Wilson trade and go, well, that's a success for Denver. That worked out well for them. Mm-hmm. That was, or that you look at it to Seattle and go, well, Carroll gets fired here now. So the coach, this is what they did. I was getting some of this in my chat. Carroll gets fired, and these same Russell Wilson folks then come into my chat and go, see, that's why the Russell Wilson trade was a mistake. You just go, new data, new information should drive you to new results if that data is telling you different things from what your predisposed biases had you at the front of it. And there's not enough at times movement in some fans to be able to take on the new data and let that then build their understanding of the team as they go forward. And I think it's in both of these two camps with that. It shows up quite a bit.
Yeah, I get the sense that there are people out there who think that Pete and Russ are like on either side of a set of scales. Like when one goes up, the other has to go down, like they're connected, like a teeter-totter or something.
Yeah.
So if one guy's really good, that must mean the other guy's really bad, and vice versa. It's like, no, it's totally possible for Russ to be bad and Pete to be bad at the same time. They're not connected in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. It keeps being that there has to be one that's going to be successful going forward, too, to your point on that, right? That as we move forward, one of these two will be successful. It's like, well, what if they both have experienced already their greatest success? What if they've already experienced their brightest days? Because there's a lot more data and information that would point to that being the case. And if it's not the case, my thing with it is then present me the data and information that shows that that's not that. I can show you quite a bit to the one side of this that proves what I'm saying. You got a little fraction of a tiny thing to try to prove what you're saying on those people that are on that other side of the fence with this one. And right. Again, that's where I come back to not any real objectivity being applied, but more of, I really love this guy. This guy was really special to me. And man, I emotionally feel a certain way about this right now. And I'm going to let you feel how my emotions feel about that. Fire away. But it doesn't change it from what the reality of the situation is at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's one thing when you're saying something, but it's another thing when you're arguing something. And when you're arguing something, you have to contend with facts. And some people are not so great at that part of it, I think.
No, they want the emotionality to run the day. My emotions feel right. So that's going to run this. And it's like, then you start to ask them for tangible things that they can build their argument upon, and you don't get a lot of that. And then it quickly, of course, descends into stuff like name calling and all that, because they just don't have anything to really call back on. And I think a lot of this stuff with the Carroll and the Russell Wilson folks, that stuff, it's a lot of that coming back to stuff where it's like, you have a lot to base it on. You love the guy. I get that. I love the guy, but we're talking about 2024. We're not 10 years ago, not 5 years ago. We're talking about right now, where both of these guys are at in their particular careers. And that was the hard part in this discussion, Brendan, as we were leading through the season, and so many fans trying to kind of at times in what I was doing and you were doing, sort of preparing them for this potentiality. Not that we're predicting it was going to happen. It was a shock. It was a complete shock, but that the potentiality was there because we spoke about in exact terms what was being held up, what was causing the problems at play. And
yeah. And I'll, as for this super chat, I do not fear making a bad hire on this next coach the way some people seem to. Because I think some people don't know this, but I know you know this, Brandon. But when you hire a coach and he doesn't do good, there's this thing that you can do after a couple years. You call them into your office and you sit them down, and that thing you can do when they're not good. You know what I'm getting at here? You know that thing?
It's something like it's a let go. We've had a boy. There's a word. Feels like there's a word on this one.
Yeah.
Feels like is it fired? Fired? Is that the
You
one?
fire the man and you call it a day.
Yeah.
Back in 2015, the New York Giants fired Tom Coughlin because he had gone senile.
Mhm.
Right? He had
Right.
lost his mind completely. He did not know what he was doing. He completely forgot how to manage a clock. It was bad. It was sad. It was depressing. They proceeded to hire Ben McAdoo, who was terrible and gone after 2 years. They hired Pat Shurmur, who was terrible and gone after 2 years. And then they hired Joe Judge, who was terrible and gone after 2 years.
Yeah.
So, did they make a mistake firing a senile coach just because the next 3 guys they got were awful?
Somebody posted in my chat yesterday, yes, on that very thing. And I didn't buy it. I don't buy it. It's again that thing of it's just like the Russ and Pete thing that you just talked about. It has to be there's a victor here. Somebody's coming through over the finish line on these scenarios, either the new coach or the old coach. And then you come down to it and you go, well, what if it's both a no? What if the answer isn't there's a yes here on either door? And the thing about moving to a new coach, and as tough as the Giants scenario is, and as tough as it would be to go through a couple of coaches or another bad coach like Moore for a year to have to suffer, is that it's about the commitment to finding the right coach. This is a little bit like the quarterback thing at times too. You got to quarterbacks are not guaranteed. It's that whole, these franchise quarterbacks grow on trees. If you just dedicate to picking one, you'll get the right one. It's not the way this works. It's dedicating the approach to finding the right one, to not being okay with being mediocre or slightly better than mediocre, to going and trying to push for championships, meaning you need the right guy in here. Do you want to give the guy the time to establish his culture and to put things in place so that it is the right way before you make your decision on what you do? So you don't want to be cutting him too early. Sure. But you also will see signs in those couple of years. I think the fact that this was a 2-year reset with Carroll, for instance, Brendan, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if Joey's like, okay, you need to let the reins go on this old defense. Less of dropping to depth, bail drop coverage, cover 3, covering to the depth. You're getting slid apart up in front of your defense as far as the passing game goes. Your offense is rudimentary, and you don't throw to the middle of the field, and you only run to the middle of the field. We've got to this got to change, Pete. This got to change. Okay, I get it. I'll change. Yeah, you're right. Got to change. Got to embrace the got to change. Then she's watching these 2-year period, and it's beyond the results you get as far as your record. You didn't see those new principles, philosophies at all being established. And you had cosmetic changes on the surface, but nothing below the surface. And that's the same thing you would do with a new coach. You would say over that period of time, are we seeing that culture being established? Are we seeing the signs of that coming together? Dan Campbell, for instance, came in. He didn't win it first, but you could see something was starting by year 2 to kind of cook together. This thing's starting to, he's starting to, the lights are going on. They didn't make the playoffs in that second year, but the things were starting to come on. You're starting to feel that that it was working. And that's what's going to happen here. And it may be that we have to go through a couple of coaches to get to potentially the next coach who can take us to an elite contending state. But I'm okay with that process because I trust in the fact that if we remained, we would have remained in just a little bit better than a mediocre state, more likely than not. And I don't want to be in that place. That's the worst spot to be in from a franchise perspective.
Mm-hmm. And not that I would ever advocate for tanking, but I do advocate for understanding that things take time. So if you do miss on a coach or even a couple coaches, you're going to get some really, really good draft picks out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you eventually do find the coach, you've got a really talented foundation. One of the best things about Pete Carroll, even to this day, is the fact that he won't let a team bottom out, which from his perspective, that's great. I don't want a coach that loses every game. I don't want what's the guy on the Browns who went like 3-36? Hugh Jackson. Yeah. I don't want a Hugh Jackson, but I also acknowledge that in the process of building a truly great team, sometimes you got to spend a year or 2 at the bottom. And if we end up doing that and it ends up building a great team in a few years, I'll sign up for that over winning 9 games every year.
Agreed. It's that eternal debate, Brennan, consistent winner or aspire for Super Bowls. And sometimes in life, sometimes in football, you got to pick a lane. You don't get a ride down the middle of the path. You got to choose one or the other. And if the other is just that I got to bleed a little blood in order to get to that side of it, so be it.
Mm-hmm. Lord Boom, thank you for the $2. Aloha bees. It's a bright new day. Can't wait for what's next. That's the attitude that I like. I like that.
I do too. I like the optimism outlook on this. Again, Revere Carroll, put the statue out in front of the stadium tomorrow. All of that. But I'm very excited for what comes next. I'm excited for an offseason of coverage, whoever we hire, to be able to look at their scheme, look at their situation, what they're going to bring to play that's different from what we've done. It's a new page turning over in every way, and that's going to be a good thing for this team. Trust us on that.
Yes. Might not be immediate, but we'll get there.
We'll get there.
All right. So new coaches. That's where this conversation gets really interesting. A lot of different things to consider here. First of all, number one, I think, is the consideration that we're keeping Schneider, which means we have a GM in place. So that right there is going to remove at least one guy from the conversation, right? So you be Bill Belichick. You're coming into the office to interview with the Seahawks. You be Bill Belichick. I'll be John Schneider, and you do get to the part where you say you want to be the GM.
All right. How you doing there? Hey, John, how's it going? How you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good, Bill. How about you, man? Sorry about how things ended in New England. Great career, though.
Only won 6 Super Bowls. What do they want me to do? I don't what they want. Whatever. I want your job. I want the head coaching job. Seahawks. So you give me that job.
You want my job.
Well, yeah, your job and head coaching job, both.
You want Pete's job and you want my job.
No, you can be general manager still, but just is going to be a title. I might just go to a title.
F you and your mother. All right, we're done here.
Off to Atlanta.
So, no Bill Belichick, not happening, never happening, not in a million years.
No Bill Belichick here. He's going to find a team that will be desperate enough with him to give him the general manager control.
Yeah. So I also wonder if that precludes Harbaugh. There's been a little bit of back and forth about this on my channel. Some people think Harbaugh would want GM power. Other people think that he might be okay with not having GM power for a little bit.
So it's obviously a question that I don't think we can firmly answer one way or the other here. I think that what we can say about this with the thought process of whether or not he's going to want that is there's two things that could stand out to me with this that could open the door for a relationship between Harbaugh and Schneider. First off, if there was going to be a general manager that would make Harbaugh feel warm and fuzzy that he didn't have to have those duties, that was not he could take those hands off and just concentrate on coaching. Let's keep in mind Harbaugh's almost 60 years old now. So maybe he doesn't want to take on all of that right now. That Schneider, and a man who has put together 2 Super Bowl rosters, who's put together these consistent winning programs. And as I've said on this, remember too, any coaches coming into house, they're taking over for Carroll. And you better believe that Harbaugh's going to be very well aware of this. Understand the scheme limitations and the way that the program was run at times with a little bit of an e-brake on in their approach on both sides of the ball. And they're going to instantaneously release that e-brake and know there'll be some success with that. So I think that he looks at Schneider and goes, potentially, maybe this is a guy that isn't some just hot shot slick young GM who's never done jack diddly and who I've got to try to answer to, versus a guy that's got the pelts on the wall, who's got the championship trophy in the trophy case, who he might be more willing to go, okay, I'll take this as a hands off. And just the second point to this too, Schneider also has that ability to go to Harbaugh and say, I've operated within the relationship of being seamless with the coach and being able to fit to his needs versus also being able to do my general manager duties so that you don't have to be the whole general manager, but you can still understand that you're going to have a true voice in the front office in what you want to see in the outlook of your team in a way that Trent Baalke did not provide you when you were with the Niners. And I think that those could be 2 unique aspects and traits that the Hawks could provide that I don't think other stops could, absent just giving him the general manager control.
Okay. So that's going to be an interesting point of contention. Hiring Harbaugh would also be a pretty good way to boost the value of the team, I would say. If you want to hire the guy who just won the national championship, the guy who had this amazing, like you look at his resume, he's killing it. Like his resume in terms of quality is like he goes to Michigan and is excellent over the course of 7-8 years. All he did in San Fran, remarkable run in San Fran. You go all the way back to when he was the quarterback coach in Oakland, turning Rich Gannon into an MVP candidate. or no, he literally won MVP actually.
I believe he did. Yes, he did.
Yeah. So like his resume, that is a hire that boosts the value of your team significantly the moment he walks in the door.
There's no hire that guarantees success, but there is one hire that comes pretty damn close. And he has won at every stop. Just take away from the as a coordinator at college, San Diego State. San Diego State's not an epicenter of winning, Brendan. He goes to Stanford. Stanford was not a winning state. He went out there and brought them to a winning state. And Shaw came in there and had a little bit of some role after him, kind of being able to benefit a little bit on the back end of Harbaugh after Harbaugh left. But then that program has kind of gone back to pittering away since he's left. Michigan was in a not a deathly state, but they were nowhere near the days of what they were in those 90s with Lloyd Carr and some of the teams he put together that got to the Rose Bowl. Nowhere near. And he brought these programs up. So he wasn't taking over programs like, I'll go into Alabama. They're already riding high. I'll take them up or Georgia, whatever. No, he had to take these programs up. Every stop he's gone at, he's won. He comes to Seattle, he will win. I know that there's some that are in the Hawk fan base have a little bit of that old anger towards him. They don't like his, I say he's got a bit of a punchable face, but he knows how to coach, and he would be phenomenal here, and he would maximize an already really talented roster to the utmost. He would bring the discipline that is direly needed on this football team, and he's got the greatest potential of any of the coaches out there, I think, to take us to a championship. I mean, bar none, and it's not even close. Everyone else is just a huge risk and a huge gamble. So he is my number one guy. I would take a heavy run at him. I would certainly not want to give him I don't want to give any coach general manager control, so I'm not doing that. But maybe Schneider and him can find some of that middle ground part there to where he doesn't need all of that, and understanding that, he's going to have a damn good team to work with where that's not going to be the requirement there. And we'll see how it plays out. But to me, he is the easy peasy, far and away number one guy I would look to bring in, because wherever he's going to go, he's going to win. It's undoubted. Not undoubted, but it's just nearly almost undoubted.
It would be very hard to not win with Jim Harbaugh at this point. I mean, look at where the Niners were literally right before he got there. They were one of the worst teams in the league.
That's what I'm saying. All four of these spots he's taken on. He's not ever taken the easy way out. He's never taken what's the program already writing I can jump in on. He left San Francisco and he could kind of have his pick of the litter. He could have gone and taken an easy gig to re-put himself back up, or just waited a year and come back in the NFL if he wanted. But, he went into the Michigan program, his alma mater, understanding that it was in a low state, and brought him up. And like you said, San Francisco did so as well. When he left San Francisco, what happened? That's the other thing about this. When he leaves these programs, they all dip most of the time. So San Francisco also, you got Tom Sula and the heavy dip at that point. And I'm sure if he were to leave Michigan, it would probably not be back up there competing for championships on a yearly basis. So, that's really weighs heavily in my mind. I understand that there's a Hawks contingent, but I think the second he starts going out there and winning, all of those guys, everyone will forget the past and him antics on the sideline, and they'll go, oh, okay, well, he's going to get us to the promised land, so be it.
Right. Pandemonium Bad, thank you for the $10 super chat. Considering the change of the guard across NFL coaching hires, I like the idea of Ben Johnson. DCs seem much more readily available, while quality OCs seem harder to find. Ben Johnson's at the top of my list as well. He's one of the guys I would be very excited to bring in.
Ben Johnson would certainly be at the top of my list as well. I would have him ahead of Dan Quinn. He might even be number 2 if I really thought about it. Obviously, this has all come down the track in the last 24 hours, Brendan. And as I was telling about it yesterday, I hadn't really done the full scope look at all of the coaches kind of outside of the names on the surface, just because I wasn't sure this was really going to happen. And as you know, we've got to put our time and effort in the channel at times into the things that, scout prospects, look at coaches for a coach we don't know will let really even be fired. Right. And it's just like, well, I'm going to go scout some prospects, but I'm going to look a little bit more into the coaches here over the next couple of days myself that are out there. But Ben Johnson, he's done a wonderful job with Detroit. He took that offense over after a point where Anthony Lynn was fired. And Lynn was miserable. The Lions team was in horrible shape. And from the moment he took over, he has taken that offense up, and not always with a ton of talent across the board. He's been able to really do a lot of manufacturing and being inventive. And word I've seen reference to him as fearless as a play caller. And I love that established with an OC. So he seems to be on the rise, young kid, but certainly seems to be a guy that's going to get a job this offseason as a head coach somewhere, if not in Seattle. And I wouldn't mind him. I want an offensive minded head coach. It's kind of like above this particular guy or that particular guy. Give me an offensive minded head coach that can role and get the best out of this talent. That's where the talent is on this team right now. An offensive coordinator comes in, like that's the better talent right now is on your offensive side of the ball. A defensive coordinator coming in, he's got a lot of work that he's gonna have to do to get that talent up, get that thing ready.
And again, every year we see offensive-minded coaches in the Super Bowl lately. The last defensive-minded coach to make the Super Bowl was probably Belichick, 2018.
That's true.
Like Andy Reid rules the world right now. Guys like Zach Taylor made the Super Bowl with the Bengals. He's an offensive guy. Sean McVay rules the world right now. Kyle Shanahan rules the world right now. All these offensive guys, like there isn't a heck of a lot going on the defensive side. Like is Sean McDermott defensive? I think he is. He's probably the best one.
He's defensive, but you have Mike McDaniels. You look at the NFC East, and Philadelphia Sirianni, offensive background. The second place team's got an offensive background. Even third place team's got an offensive background. They got the fourth place team in Washington, and I think they're fourth place. Maybe Giants are third, fourth, but that's the one defensive one you have. So it's harder to get this done as a defensive coordinator, which makes me wonder why you would choose defensive coordinator as your approach if you were an owner in this situation. Why go down the harder path? What for what reason just to zig when everyone's zagging? I don't get that, because this is a trend that's also continuing to go in this direction, probably even more to an extreme as we go into the future seasons. And unless defensive coordinators get some rejuvenation and they find some turn to suddenly, start to catch up to these evolving offenses, I just don't see the value in going with the DC. I think it's, especially again, talent's not there on this defense. There's a lot. If you look at this team, if you're going to the defensive side of the ball, you're going to have a lot to do. You got the second highest investment in this defense in the entire National Football League. You got to pull this part away, throw this out, toss this out, re-put this back through. It's going to be hard to get to your vision of your ideal defense if you're going to take over as a defensive-minded head coach here. First, an offensive guy who comes in, he's like, DK, Jackson, yeah. Oh, Tyler, what's up? Woo, Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, I see you. I got a left tackle too. Oh, I don't have a right one. Oh, I've got a right one also. All right, let's go. I mean, that's got to look kind of tasty and enticing to these offensive-minded guys.
Yeah, and Ben Johnson would look at Geno in much the same way he probably looked at Goff, right? Those guys have a lot in common.
They do. I think that he'd actually think that he gets more out of Geno than he got out of Goff, because Geno has mobility. Geno has the ability to throw on the run and off platform. You know what I mean? Geno's got better pocket mobility than Goff. Maybe you're not giving initially Geno the offensive line Goff had there with Detroit, but nonetheless, you look at him, you go, but I have a guy I still maintain, I love what he did with Goff. Goff's been a legit player, but to me, Geno has a better overall skill set in what he brings to the bear. And you give him an offensive line. If you look at the difference between Goff and Geno and their pass protection they had this year, say nothing of the run blocking up in front of them, it's night and day difference.
Right. So, Ben Johnson's near the top of the list as well. Couple other candidates that are going to be near the top of people's list that people are discussing a lot. I just kind of want to get your quick feel about it. I know you haven't done all the due diligence yet, but I just want to throw out some names that people are putting out there. One defensive guy that people are still excited for because he's been just that good is Mike McDonald from Baltimore. Has completely turned that defense around. One of the league's worst 2 years ago, really good last year, number one in the league this year. He is the one defensive guy that I think even our fan base would completely get behind.
Yeah, I would too, quite honestly. And he might be just about the only defensive guy that I'm going to, Dan Quinn I'll support, and I can see where the vision goes of it. We'll talk about Dan in a second. But when it comes to McDonald, what he's done is I want a coach that's pushing at the forefront. I want a coach that's on the cutting edge state of mind of things. I've had the coach that's sort of 3 decades behind in their approach from a philosophy standpoint, especially defensively. Get me somebody on that cutting edge. And what Ben Johnson has done, he's embraced the stack fronts. You and I talked about week after week. We'd love to see from Seattle utilize more. And then he utilizes blitzing, something we've loved to have seen. And you have the personnel in here who can blitz. Even if you do cut out a Jamal, you still probably have a Julian Love. You still have maybe a Bobby coming back, a Devin Witherspoon back in the flex. So you still have some guys that can get that done. But then it's also what he does, which is fun up front with the stack fronts and the games that they run up there. Because it's not that he's trying to bring blitzes like Wink Martindale, Brendan. It's just that he's trying to confuse you. He's going to drop in a lot of the times to a front four off of those 6-7 man fronts. It goes to front four and those guys drop out. Huskies did a lot of this. You saw at times through this year too, right, Brendan? Like they could manufacture things defensively and creating that confusion, especially that Texas game. Remember we talked about the Texas game where you had yours in those 3rd and longs, and then they would bring those stack fronts. And now yours is going to go to his hot route bubble screen play that they want to, audible to. And then they drop out of it so they can go over there and get the tackle bubble screen quickly without any yards. And that's, to me, a little bit of what you were able to do at times with those stack fronts and creating that confusion. And then you add on that, Brendan, that what he does on the back end in coverages, which is that he will flip everything on a dime on you. What you see pre-snap is not what you see post-snap, which is one of the biggest issues that's hindered our defense for years. The predictability in what a quarterback could see out there in the secondary versus what he was going to then see post-snap. And this guy's on the other end of that scale. I mean, he will take a safety and throw him out into an outside corner position and take a slot and move him into single high. He essentially, as I've said, he's sort of taken the Vic Fangio cover two shell principles, utilizing that, and also utilizing those principles within sort of the single high safety looks as well. And it all of that together makes him terribly hard to prepare for. And I think it can help him also maximize out his talent because he's going to put his players a step ahead of your players.
Yeah, I could get behind that one as well. He seems very, very good, and I don't think it's impossible to have success with a defensive first head coach. I think the degree of difficulty is harder. Is the thing at the end of the day.
Agreed.
Okay, so another guy that I want to bring up here. This is another one that gets a lot of play right now in the Seahawks fan base. Mike Vrabel just let go from Tennessee a couple of days ago. Had good success there. Never got to the top, but got close a couple times. Seems to be more of a situation where he wanted to leave. I think you were talking about this the other day.
Yeah.
Vrabel, how do you feel about Vrabel?
I like Vrabel. I do. I think that I would have. I think I'd have Quinn a step ahead of him on my pecking order. I think that he is a really good coach, and I think that he's a coach that one where you have to look at with coaches in scenarios where they're at. If you're like, well, this guy's this way, always lock in a little bit on what they had to deal with from a quarterback perspective, because a lot of these coaches have their story told about their stints. And it's really more a reflection upon just having awful quarterback play at times or below average quarterback play, or in the case of him, not having below average quarterback play, it's sometimes having decent quarterback play, but the quarterback prices that they were having to pay there. Second highest cap hit, I think the first highest cap hit for Tannehill in the last 2 years. And that's while that offensive line is kind of eroded. Taylor Lewan moving on, some other guys moving on, getting older, not as strong as it once was, not able to bring. They have the A.J. Brown trade with Vrabel did not like. You could see him shaking his head on draft day as they had a shot of the war room and him just obviously not happy about it. And that trade didn't bear out well for the Titans. That's not his fault. They got that kid out of Arkansas at the receiver position who's just not really done a whole hell of a lot.
Yeah.
And on top of it, they've had other draft picks that just, it's not his, Caleb Farley, we knew he had a bad back coming out of Virginia Tech. Why are you taking that in the second round, Tennessee? You're taking a hope and a prayer that that's going to get better. It hasn't. Christian Fulton injured all over the place. Just these things abounded a bit, which has not been his fault. Now he brings very much an old school approach, and I'm just going to run and hammer the football. You're not getting a wide ranging offensive attack at this point. You're going to get a lot of, potentially even 11 personnel or, not 11 personnel, but, I formation looks and whatnot with even fullbacks and stuff. You're tight in your fullback position. So he's going to create a tough team. He's going to create a team that's going to play hard every NFL Sunday, but I don't know if he's going to create a real exciting team. And he's a guy that even why I put Quinn a little bit ahead of him. I think they're both very equivalent in what they can bring about with their defensive personnel. But I think at least with Quinn, there's a bit of more of an opening for him to trust in his offensive coordinator to let things go. Whereas Vrabel strikes me as a little bit like Carroll, and I'm going to manage the game, right? Shorten the clock and try to, overbear a little bit on this one, I would say.
Yeah. I'm kind of in the same boat. I think I would prefer Quinn to Vrabel. I am very wary of the fact that Quinn was unable to really fix the defense at all in Atlanta, even when that team had success. I'm concerned about that. Also concerned about the fact that he has mostly inherited great talent at all the places that he's had a lot of success in. Honestly, the only exception to that would be when he was with the Florida Gators. Showed up to a Florida defense that was like a little above average and made them elite within 2 years as a coordinator. And there are some monsters on that defensive line that he helped coach up and get drafted in the first round, second round. I don't know. The more I look at the Quinn thing, the more that, I don't hate it, but it really would be kind of boring to me. I think I would feel like you're just trying to put the ball in play there, and that's great. But we just had a guy who would put the ball in play. Let's be a little bolder here.
Yeah, I think it's a boring hire is the one I would put to it. I'll support it. I'm not going to say it's going to not have some potential for success with it. But there's a few things that are striking with me. Like you say, unable to get the defense really right in Atlanta. That's your forte. I need a defensive guy that can not require everything to be prime across the board for their given expertise on whichever side of the ball it may be to flourish. You've got to be able to, get the most out of what you've got at times. And I want to see you do that. Otherwise, I'll find a coach who will. There are coaches out there who can do that. And when you look at Cowboys right now, DeMarcus Lawrence, Micah Parsons, Trayvon Diggs, though I know he's been out, but I know Deron Bland stepped up, and that's probably representation a little bit of his, development there. And they've had other times where there's not some positions that are as stronger, but yeah, he's just one for me with defensively. I feel like you're trying to move away from Carroll. The point of moving away from Carroll is move away from the Carroll, not to hold on to vestiges. Otherwise, just keep Carroll here. And I know Dan Quinn, I will give him credit, runs a defensive scheme that has a lot of differences to what Carroll does. He's way more willing to run man principles. He's way more willing to blitz. He still does the pre and post snap predictability thing. What you see is what you're going to get pre to post snap, which I don't like, but he knows what he's doing as far as being a former defensive line coach, Brendan, and also being a guy that understands how to progress pass rushers and get them to be more technicians with their hands. That's why, like you mentioned, with the Florida defenders, especially the defensive lineman that got drafted, that's where he's really good and legitimately so. He knows how to get those guys better. And of course, we've seen with many players out there, be like a Dale Taylor or Rasheem Green, guys that didn't really know what to do with their hands. They're Ricky Bobby and Talladega Nights. I know what to do with my hands. What would do with my hands?
That's right. Yeah, that's why people take up smoking. Gives them something to do with their hands.
That's right. The nervousness.
Yeah. The one thing about hiring a defensive coach, and I'm not married to this idea, and it might already be too late to do this, but if you hired a defensive first coach, that would maybe open the door to keep your offense together as is. Like, bring back Waldron, bring back some of these assistant coaches on offense, and the guy who comes in, like if it's Dan Quinn might say, okay, go ahead, go do your thing. It's cool. You guys have built a decent foundation. You're doing okay. I'm not going to mess with you guys. Go do your thing. And we'll just keep that continuity going. Whereas if you bring in a guy like, say, Ben Johnson, he's going to want all of his coaches to come with him and basically blow out the whole staff. That's the one thing about getting somebody like Dan Quinn or Vrabel, maybe, that I might be on board for.
Yeah, it's a possibility. It also comes into that factor in what we're talking about with Harbaugh, but every coach is going to see this, and that when they come in here, they're going to be aware of the fact that this team has gotten certain parts in how it's been run, that I get to come in and I don't have to be brilliant, right? Like there's the X's and O's of how I've got to be brilliant. But when it comes to something as simple as, like, Brendan, we're going to throw the ball to the middle of the football field, right? Mm-hmm. We're going to run to the edges of the defense. These aren't brilliant tactical decisions that need to be made. These are straightforward. Right when I walk in the door, we're going to start to do this thing. That's silly that we didn't do that before. We're doing it now. And to your point on this, does that then give a guy like a Waldron who comes to him and goes, well, look, yeah, I wasn't able to run my offense the way I wanted to run it. He tells me to hammer the A and B gap with these power gap runs, and then he wants me to throw 9 routes all day. What do you want me to do? Dan, I mean, I'm trying here. I was trying to facilitate it. I don't know if it's that way it went. I'm sort of guessing on this, of course, Brendan, but if it did go that way, then wouldn't Dan be a little bit more like, okay, yeah, you didn't get to run your thing your way. I know how Carroll can sometimes, I was a defensive coordinator underneath him. I know how it can go. Okay. I get how that went. So maybe he, as much as any of the coaches you could hire, likely to retain some of the guys, maybe to some, because he's probably maybe on some of these guys, he also got a bit of a history with them, which is maybe part of what could open this up as far as being a right. Hire. Another part though with this too, Brendan, is Carroll potentially being hired somewhere else and taking those coaches with it.
Possibly. Yeah. Let's see here. Kevin Mullen, thank you for the $4.99. How much do you think it'll cost to sign Darth Vader from Michigan? Also, why isn't Georgia's Kirby Smart not in consideration?
Kirby seems to have gotten in the same place that Clemson coach got a couple of years ago, right? Where they win the national title, huh?
Was it Dabo?
Dabo, yeah, right? Like, it's odd because they go in there, they win the national title, they have a couple of years of run where they're awesome, and certainly Kirby's even has surpassed what Dabo did with Clemson, but Clemson with Trevor Lawrence win the national title. You would have thought that would have elevated Dabo at that time, and maybe he's just happy to stay at Clemson, and he was just, I just like Clemson. I just like out here in Clemson. It's great. But with Kirby, you certainly don't hear very much smoke, as far as I've not yet heard anybody connecting him to the NFL at this point, and I don't really know why, Kevin. Even a guy like what isn't the guy at Oregon? He's out of his tree, off of his tree. So his guys off of his tree have had some success, but with the way he's built that program, I don't know why. I don't.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and as for how much it'll cost, I mean, we're in the position of not having to care. We have a very wealthy owner. Money is no object when it comes to paying coaches in the NFL. Like, if Harbaugh wants $20 million a year, we can say done, next.
I think it's probably going to come between 20 and 25 million a year. It'll probably be a 4 to 5 year contract. So it's his, this is my, going to work or not. This will be my final contract I probably get. My last coaching job, I probably do it from Harbaugh's perspective on it. He'll want that money in there. You're going to have to give him, it's guaranteed. As Brendan said, we don't have a salary cap on coaches. You can pay him whatever the hell you want to pay him. And it shouldn't be a factor when you're trying to get the best coach. You shouldn't arrive and say, hey, this is the best coach, but boy, the cost of him is too much. I mean, what are they making? $300 million a year in profit alone in the NFL as an owner? I mean, there's plenty of money there, and you have an impending sale coming down the road. Find a way to work if that's the right coach.
Yeah, you guys want to see me go off. You guys want to see me explode on a video. Then there be a report that comes out that we got in a bidding war for Jim Harbaugh, but backed out because the money got too much. Like, seriously, I will lose it. It will be YouTube gold.
Yeah. It's ridiculous. It's an absolute ridiculous deal. He is the far and away best candidate. And in being the far and away best candidate, you're going to have to pay the best prices to get it. You want to go shop at Walmart and get something that falls apart in a year. That's what you're going to get. You want to pay for something good that can last, that can set, then you got to pay the prices for it. Market prices are what they are. But with Harbaugh, the good news is what you're playing in at this point is not a guy that you might pay Brendan like a Kirby Smart, where you give him the 4-year, $60 million deal as a coach to come here. You don't know if he can really do a pro. Can he really coach pros? Does he really? This guy, he knows how to coach pros, how to motivate men. It is one of the things that stands out to me right now beyond X's and O's, Brendan, that's got to be in consideration of the average fan in what has presented itself as a new issue in this sport. One that I hear a lot about in the background in some of the talks I have with people that deal, especially in the business world and everything else. You have a younger generation of player coming onto the scene now who is not as easily motivated as prior generations. Video games and distractions exist all across the board the second they walk off the practice field. Getting guys and getting people invested into the team, into the process, and stepping away from those things, as I think we've seen here with Carroll with this recent generation of kids. And part of why I think he's reached this spot is the lack of being able to get the message to resonate through. How do I say what I say so that you hear me and don't just tune me out? And it sounds really straightforward, maybe kind of even somewhat easy for a coach to do that, but it's, I think, a pretty complicated process in setting up that relationship and getting that dynamic in place to where you truly get the kid's ear pulled and that they're hearing you all the way through. And especially when it comes to motivating them to try to reach for greatness.
Mm-hmm. Right. Clemente Jackson, thank you for the member message. Hey, just joined. Hope you guys are doing great. Appreciate the streams. Do you think new coach brings in DC, or we also hire one separately? I have a pretty strong take on this one.
Yeah, it's a little different from Baldwin, huh?
Yeah. I think when you hire the coach, you ask him what he wants, and if you are capable of doing it, then you do it. Like, I don't want a scenario where we're like, okay, you're the head coach, but we're not going to give you anything that you want. You're going to have to work with whatever we give you and have fun getting in the unemployment line in 2 years because this is never going to work. Now, if the new coach comes in and asks for Caleb Williams, you'd probably have to say, look, that's not going to happen. There's nothing we can do about that. We're picking 16. Come on. We don't even have a second round pick.
Yeah.
But if he comes in and says, I want Anthony Weaver from Baltimore as my DC, then you would say, okay, we're going to do everything we can to make that happen.
Yeah, it's absolutely, and maybe Waldron stays with a given certain kind of coach coming here like Quinn. There's no way Hurt's going to remain. And that's just nor much of any of the staff here with it, in that the defense has been porous for years here. it needs a heavy change. And it's hard to have any with Waldron. You kind of get a little bit of that excuse. I'm not saying the hurt wasn't maybe held back a little bit in his way around this defense, but unfortunately the offense at least has been respectable in recent years. The defense has not been so. So you just can't lean as much on that because the coach just wouldn't have much confidence in you. And what have you done here? What can I lean on that you've brought to the table as the DC these past 2 years that has made this defense better? And hard to come up with those answers at this point if I'm an incoming coach.
Yeah, and you got to let Clint Hurtt go, so when he gets hired as a head coach somewhere, you get the 3rd-round picks for the,
Right.
I mean,
If you let him go, you don't get the 3rd-round picks. You got to keep on the
Exactly.
roster. So yeah,
exactly. I mean, you got to, people are going to be falling all over themselves for Clint Hurtt, right?
probably
Mhm.
so.
Daniel W., thank you for the $4.99. Post June 1st cuts seem bad with new head coach. Why limit his cap for 2 years? Eat it all in one season like Rams just did and have the books clean. I am actually an advocate for this idea. I like it, especially when it comes to Jamal Adams.
I don't have a problem going that route, Daniel. I like to say with this, I'm open to going down different lanes. Just pick your lane. Don't try to chop the middle point. If you're gonna, cut. If you're gonna cut to go for it, cut to go for it this year. If you want to sustain the bad stuff and get it out, clear the books, clear the chamber, then go that route. But don't try to do both at the same time. Pick a lane on how you want to operate this coming season as the new coach, as general manager, and what you want as your approach. And so it can go either way. Certainly there's some intelligence behind doing what you're advocating for, Daniel, and just going full on cut through. I could get that completely. Eat the dead money, sit on the dead money, get through next season. San Francisco's one more year to be in through the end of their run. We'll see where the Rams are at. We'll see the Cardinals at that point. I'm good with it. But if they also have a coach who comes in here and says, hey, your talent has not been maximized these past 2 seasons, John, you know damn well this is the truth. You know your coach has been putting the e-brake on both the offense and the defensive side of the ball. You've been paying guys like Nick Bellore, 34-year. We're not doing that here. We're going different. And when we do differently, John, you're going to get more instantaneous results from that. You're going to get more victories from that on the other side of this if we just start to take advantage of these approaches. And that might be a draw for new coach Brendan to not go into that. Let's cut it all down, replant the trees, and come back here next year. I think that instead is one where coach could very likely, they want to be aggressive if they got the millions, and you're not coming into an empty cupboard here. It's more like you just went to Costco and it's like, oh, Mom, you went to Costco, huh? Yeah. Oh, so look at that. Oh, nice. Okay. You got some of the pretzels. Yeah, we got some. Okay.
You got to take the kid to Costco though, so he can eat in the food court.
That's true. You did miss out on the hot dog experience and the samples, though they've dialed back the samples. I've noticed. I think they finally realized people would go in there trying to just got people like, oh, that's good. I'm not sure yet. Still not sure. Here we go. Okay, next station's over there. Okay.
Yeah, it's a cheap date. Just take a girl to Costco and wander from sample to sample.
Did you see that on Reddit? That post, the guy who brought his girlfriend to the
Costco.
They got like set up like it's all formal with the. Hey, it's times are tough right now. I get it.
Right. But yeah, I'm not against doing this at all. You can still compete with a lot of dead money. Ask the Rams. Ask the Seahawks last year.
Absolutely. It's not an impossibility to do so. It just all depends on the assessment of the new head coach coming in, and you want to give him his chance if you're Schneider to, okay, you're coming in here, you're not impelled by a timeline of this has to be done right now. What is the right approach for us to take to get this to your vision? And he then informs you of that. And then John Schneider makes that, vision happen for him from a personnel standpoint. So that's the most important part. And that is all just basically determined by the coach more than it being just a tried and true, do this for 100% certainty. If Harbaugh comes in here and he says, Daniel, hey, I can take this team to the Super Bowl next year. I can see things across the board that I can instantaneously fix on this team. Get this guy out, get that guy out, clear that money, get me a line that can work on the offensive line that can actually open holes, John. And we're back to cooking next year. We're on the barbecue, chickens, breast, steak, all across the board on that sucker. Let's roll. And I'm okay with that too. I just make sure you pick either one or the other, kind of, so to speak.
Kronos, thank you for the member message. A Quinn hiring would come down to the staff he puts together over his actual talent as a play caller. I mean, obviously, Quinn had his only real success as a head coach with Kyle Shanahan, so definitely some truth to this.
Yeah, I'm bringing it up right now. I wanted to reference the record because I think it's the most important part of this. What was it? something like I don't know.
In Atlanta
20. Yeah, he was like 24 and 29 before Shanahan. So
or
like
after Shanahan? Because
one
they
of the
came to Atlanta at the same time.
right. Okay, so then it would have been after Shanahan. So, you know, yeah, Shanahan was a great hire, and that's what people tell me about Dan is that he'll hire the right people, because he hired Shanahan.
Mhm.
And I go, well, maybe, maybe he'll hire the right people. I certainly has a lot of connections through the league, and he might. But looking at his record after Shanahan, it would seem like he didn't necessarily hire the right guys after that,
Mhm.
which is improved that. And that's how we get back to this being a bit of a boring hire and not as much of a to me, the slam dunk as some people would have it be in his connection, along with those former connections to Carroll, along with the former connections to the defense. This is about turning over new and going in a different direction to me. I'll support if he's hired, but I just think you look at that and you break that down, you go, I don't know. And I'm right. You're right, Kronos. It will come down to who hires at that point. And I don't like that about a coach. And that's what I have to say in who I hire. Well, he's a good hire as long as he brings in his right hires around him. I want to know a coach who I have absolute faith who's going to bring his right hires. It goes without saying. If Harbaugh's in here, does any of us have any question about him not bringing in the right assistants to get the job done? No, I mean,
No.
I have no questions about that. So that's a part of that I'm not a big fan of. You bring a Ben Johnson in here, I get his big, fat intellect brain that he gets to set on the table every day. Okay? I get to lean on that. I know that comes with the process for sure. And yeah, he needs to put the staff in around it as well, but he's going to put that big brain on the offense and get more productivity out of the offense with it. So it's a little bit of a different from a guy like Quinn, as somebody was saying on the previous post, Kronos, that not next is a nose guy. Really, he's a motivator and he develops defensive linemen with their like I said, technicians and whatnot. And he's adapted the scheme somewhat. But still, for me, Brendan, a boring hire that just doesn't inspire like some of these other hires could.
Yeah, it's kind of like when Dallas hired Mike McCarthy, which was kind of seen that way when it was made, and that's worked out pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
But it can also, you can also find examples of it going the other way, of it really not working out that well when teams make the quote unquote boring hire, like Ron Rivera.
That's right. Yeah, it can still go either way. That's a good point on it. Is that it doesn't guarantee one way or the other, but it's just I don't know. There's so many directions you could go here, Brennan. And it's just a little bit like it just shades of us of going back to it's like the last three defensive coordinators are going to do all back in house. It's like we always bringing back players that are former players, all back in house. It's like, let's have some imagination and vision to look across the landscape and target truly the right one. Let's put some smart minds together in a room and have them sit down for a 10-hour period and just put together what the best approach is. I feel like that will take you outside of the known, right? That'll take you to the unknown, in my opinion. But maybe I'm wrong. Maybe he's just that awesome.
Daryl Chapman, thank you for the $4.99. I think we need to hire an offensive coach to take the next level into elite levels in the NFL, but the only defensive guy I want is Mike McDonald. Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot of that going around.
Yeah, McDonald, I'm in the same place you are, Daryl, with that one. I mean, Mike stands out to me in the defensive coordinators that are out there. Evero, I don't even think, by the way, is being let go by Carolina. I heard something, God, Tepper's a SOB, but I think I read somewhere that Evero is being held on to by Carolina, so they're not even letting him go out there and interview at different places. Which means the next head coach at Carolina has to inherit, of course, Evero. I don't have a lot of other DCs, though, outside of Mike McDaniel, Dan Quinn, and of Rabel here. I mean, and those guys are more head coaches, of course. All of those head coaches.
Okay.
But
I got one. I got one defensive guy.
Okay.
Brian Flores. Yay or nay?
I worry about his impediment to the offense. I don't doubt what he can do defensively, and much like McDonald, he'd bring a fun style, right? He'd bring that wild and free, let's blitz all over the place kind of style to it. But then offensively, is he going to let that offense do what it needs to do? And he is a little bit of a rigid coach to me. I think about like the story back to Minkah Fitzpatrick with him in Miami, and Minkah really on a high picked guy, and they're moving him all over the place, here, there, everywhere. And he never really kind of got to be able to fit to a role. And then you come to find Fitzpatrick goes to Pittsburgh, and now he becomes a Pro Bowler. And that's not good. When you as a defensive coordinator have a thing like that on your books a little bit. But I'm with you on that. He's a guy who probably is going to eventually become a head coach again in the sport.
Right. Okay, so let's go through another couple of offensive guys who will at least be considered this
Mhm.
offseason. Bob Slowick, Houston offensive coordinator.
I don't think he's ever been a head coach.
No.
Certainly a very bright mind and a guy that has been able to take a guy in CJ Stroud, who I thought the least would need a season of probably sitting on the bench, / even if he played, it was going to be a year before you were going to get him to a productive state, much less a highly productive state as CJ Stroud was. That speaks right back to Slowick and the job that he did there this year with Stroud. And certainly Stroud you give Stroud a lot of credit for that too, because he's just done a great job in his development on his own as far as pushing himself forward. But he's a fun candidate. That Houston Texan offense didn't have a lot necessarily. Weren't loaded to the gills. And, I know Nico Collins is coming along a bit for them as a receiver, but got a lot out of it. He'd be an interesting. Don't have as much of a deep dive understanding of him but again, not much of a coaching background. So I certainly don't. For me, I'm looking more to go into those hires here, Brendan, as we've talked about before, that fit to what we've had success in the past. Being a fan for the Hawks since the early 80s, the three best hires we've had in our franchise's history by far are Knox, Holmgren, and Carroll. All of those guys had a track record of success at the NFL level prior to them hiring him. Now, it doesn't mean you have to go that route, but I do lean into saying that would be nice to lean into that route if we can, because we've had such great success with it when we have.
Dave Canales, Tampa Bay Buccaneers offensive coordinator.
Much like Slowick, very untested. And you love the job that he did with Geno. I think that Geno had a good year this year, and Geno was under a lot of duress, and all those things are true at the same point in time. I think there was also a little bit of tiny dip within Geno's game from the missing of Dave Canales here, from him being gone. And the job that he did with Baker was he got Baker Mayfield's best football season out of him this year. And that is no, to me, small accomplishment, because Baker has been with the likes of Kevin Stefanski and Sean McVay. And while with Sean, it was a little late in the hour because it was a midseason thing with Stefanski. Stefanski got him in there with the playoffs with Baker quarterback. And yet Baker, in my opinion, had a better team this year, had a better year this year. And I got to give Canales a ton of credit. He's got a little bit of a quarterback whisperer kind of vibe to him in his ability to approach the position, which I do dig, because offense is the most important thing of the day right now. And then with it, quarterback position within that. So both Slowick and Canales kind of provide you, I think, kind of a similar archetype that you could look at as a head coaching option here. But there is a lot of that unknown, untested. You're not quite sure on those guys if you're bringing them in to be head coaches.
Brian Callahan, and he brings his dad with him to be the offensive line coach.
And his dad was the former coach that bounced around every which way, right?
Yeah, and he's currently in Cleveland, and he may be the best offensive line coach in the league, even to this day.
And Cleveland's got a lot of investment in that line as far as first round draft picks and higher. Is that really the line coach doing it, or is that you've got top 50?
Well, he also did great work in Dallas. He's done great work everywhere he's been. But Brian Callahan, the actual important one here, the young one, he was at Denver when they had Peyton Manning, and he's been with Cincinnati with Burrow and now Browning.
Interesting, potentially. I mean, the dad was always, because he did bounce around. I just remember always watching him in the press conference, and his personality always rubbed me wrong. The elder Callahan. Now I know that's not the younger. I don't know a lot about the younger, but that elder one, I think he went to Nebraska at one point. He just came off as kind of dickish.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you do backtrack a little bit, it's like, well, you go to Dallas. Well, so you had Tyron Smith, Frederick, and Zach Martin. It's like, still, again, we're back in that stage of you had first round picks to work with to do your job. And you did you did a good job with it, but like you had some, La'el Collins. I would not want to go with Callahan. No, I think that there's a better, firmer hire than that at that point out there than this. I'd be very much a no on that one.
Alex Van Pelt, offensive coordinator under Stefanski in Cleveland.
Certainly Stefanski's an impressive offensive mind. Anybody underneath him would be a viable target, because he is a guy that's done what he's done without the quarterback position working. So it really is all about manufacturing within that offense. And, it is an offense that's committed to balance. It's going to run, it's going to pass, utilize the screen game, misdirection a lot. But no, I think with Alex Van Pelt, I I don't know how much of that's him or how much of that's Stefanski, right? Like you have a bright mind like Stefanski in there. Pelt's probably helping him, but it's that thing of like if you hire Ben Johnson, Brendan, and then he has a great offense and he has an offensive coordinator and your team looking at his offensive coordinator to be a head coach. Would you how do you pull it apart at that point? Because that's at the head of what you brought that coach.
I mean, that's the game you have to play with almost any coaching hire you make, right? Like, is it Ben Johnson or is it his coordinator? Is it Mike McDonald or is it Harbaugh? Is it it's tough. This is the hard part for sure.
It is tough on those, but those are a different one than this one is for me, because with Ben Johnson, I'm getting the offensive mind of the offensive coordinator matters, but you're the offensive coordinator kind of a little bit. And so that's taken care of. That's handled at that point almost with your presence. And it is that way with Harbaugh a little bit, like you say as well with that. It's taken care of. It's handled. McDonald, same thing, I think. So that's what this is a little bit of our issue with Carroll through the years is like you give that a head coach there. That's the expertise they're supposed to be bringing to their side of the football to bring you that natural benefit and boon. And so I would expect that with those guys, but in a way with Van Pelt, I would have that uncertainty that that's what he's bringing. Maybe it is more reliant than on the coordinator he's bringing in to be the bright guy up underneath him, and that he doesn't have as much of the establishment of the control over the process as other guys would with that. It's just harder to know for sure. And again, haven't done the deep dive on him. So I don't know the connection with Stefanski on how much Stefanski puts on him, how much Stefanski is pushing through. But that would be my one worry in trying to make that kind of call on that. Whereas with Ben Johnson, for instance, too, if you look at him, I don't go, well, Dan Campbell's offense. Yeah, Dan Campbell's got an offensive background, but you also had Anthony Lynn there and you were 0-6 with Anthony Lynn as your offensive coordinator before you made the change to Ben Johnson. Right. So you get this great, like, boom, here, you can feel his impact and effect.
Yeah, he's too busy biting kneecaps to make an offense.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, big wad of shoe.
Mm-hmm. One last guy, Kalen DeBoer.
Kalen DeBoer feels like he needs a little more time in the oven to me. Mm-hmm. I think that the pizza crust has risen, but we don't have that golden brown around the edges on it quite yet. And I'd like to get a little bit of the golden brown with him before we get to the point of him getting to that spot of things. I think he's done a great job. There's some who mentioned it. Hey, what about, and it's an interesting thought, Brendan, if you take Kalen DeBoer and then you just set your sights in on going getting Michael Penix. And you got a coach at that point who instantaneously knows how to use that quarterback and installs the offense that's perfect for that quarterback. And, then theoretically puts the parts in place to allow that quarterback to flourish at his best. Kind of an interesting theory of an approach you could take here, and a unique one, because you haven't had that a lot of times, Brendan, right? Where you have a coach coming out as he's got a great quarterback coming out at the same time to go out there and grab. So it would be an unusual scenario to the NFL if you're able to do that. And it would be kind of interesting, but I just come back down with Kellen as much as I love the job he's done with UW, this is 2 years. And he is on the rise. I think he is on a track, Brendan, to eventually be a head coach in this NFL, even next year if he has another really good year. But I think I'd want to give him a little bit more time at the college level to establish himself.
Yeah. Nick Saban.
No, Nick Saban.
Sorry, had to do it.
I know. I think it's no coincidence that in the last 4 days you've seen Nick Saban, Bill Belichick, and Pete Carroll all out of a job for different reasons, retirement, fire, whatever. They're out of a job, and I think that it speaks to that thing I'm talking about of the generational communication thing. That you have a coach that gets to a certain age, you have a generation of players coming up that have their own kind of algorithm for the way that you need to kind of address them and interact with them to get them to do what you want them to do. And you have old school coaches with a bit of their mindset of I do how I do, and that's always worked. So it should work now, but it's not working now. I'm fed up, throw up my hands, I'm done, or I got to go somewhere else. I don't know if it's as much that with Belichick. I think he just thinks it's, I'm going to be a general manager. You're going to let me have a general manager. I don't know if it's, he's still a guy that seems to be able to, I don't know. We'll see with him on that. But the first two, I do think that's the case. I think Saban's gotten a little bit with that same thing. He had a little bit of that same look on his face you saw with Carroll the last few years, exasperated, kind of just, you feel like, man, I have a vibe off you of you being at your wit's end a little bit. And that you have that look of like, you're looking at your players like, I'm telling you what to do and you're not doing it. Right. Like that look, that look on the sideline, you was just.
Yeah. The ultimate perfectionist. I remember reading a oral history of Nick Saban's life one time, and how when he was a little kid he would like do landscaping with his dad, and the attention you had to have to having everything just be perfect when you're working on these lawns and stuff. And he talked about how he would kind of parlay that into what he wanted from his players as a coach, just this absolute perfection in every area every single time.
Yeah. And that's, I think, when you could do the old stuff too at college level, and you go deal with these kids 24/7 and beyond them 24/7, that you can get them and grind them out like that, but that's why I think Saban didn't work at the NFL level too, is it just that grinded out mentality. That's not the NFL anymore. You can't do that with practices. There aren't the two-a-days. There aren't the padded practices. You can't instill that real, just like perfectionist kind of vibe. You've got to kind of have things a little bit loosey-goosey by the nature of the beast of the time that you have to work with these guys. And it takes the right kind of coach who can be efficient with that and get through to those type of players versus the one that just finds themselves stymied.
Just real quick here, because I think I already know the answer here, but there are a couple guys that are still with a job that could find themselves out of a job in the next few days. So let's say Mike Tomlin shakes free. Any interest? Oh, I broke him. I froze him.
I know. I don't know. Again, offensive head coach would be the preference. If we're stacking up Tomlin up against Dan Quinn, Mike Vrabel, I would take Tomlin over those two myself.
Okay. Not terrible then.
No. I mean, he's never had a losing record there. I know the whole consistency of winning thing, but it's also a little bit of, he inherited Big Ben. Big Ben left. Quarterback situation sucked. So that thing I'll get into, Brendan, like if offense hasn't been the best, as far as what they put together, that line's not been particularly great. Yeah, you got Najee Harris, you got George Pickens. Fairmouth is okay. But your quarterback position, you went with Pickett 2 years ago. And it's been the duck guy. It's been Rudolph. It's Roethlisberger, who was probably done 3 years prior to him actually being done. Like, right?
Yeah.
He held on for way too long because he had that whole, I'm a legacy. And Tomlin had to deal with that on the offensive side of the ball. So I don't think he's as offensively unimaginative. I think that he's just not been given by his general manager the best of personnel, nor the most, Matt Canada as his offensive coordinator. It's like, I will say some of his hires sometimes on that offensive side of the ball through the years, though, he did take that one guy in there. He's had some of them come through that have been like, I don't know, Mike, I don't want that one, but I'd have him over the other two because I know that he'd get the discipline nature on point. Defense would be legitimate. And I think that he'd have this offense probably going pretty good too, especially the running backs we have.
Robert Saleh.
Saleh is a no for me, but again, same thing you can apply with Tomlin. You can apply here, if more so, right? Because Tomlin at least had been through some of his prime at the beginning. Saleh has been given no prime of nobody, nowhere, no how. And it does seem like the more you hear about it, Zach Wilson was forced upon him, and that he's not been happy about that and having that kid float around that organization and have to call upon him as the starting quarterback. Rodgers went down on the first drive of the season and they hitched their wagons to that horse, and that horse went lame instantaneously. It's not his fault. He's been able to keep that defense legitimate and playing hard and keeping their team in games at times, and the offense could do very little to almost nothing. The defense has also had a tremendous amount of talent put onto it for him to get those returns. So it's not him working with like less to get those returns. He's working with some talented guys, Quinn Williams and Sauce Gardner and DJ Reed, they signed in free agency. But another defensive-minded coach that I don't know if he's really able to do much with an offense. I just think with Saleh, again, I'd go with Quinn over him, and both of the two guys I'd file under more of the same. And aren't we trying to look for change?
Nate Carroll.
Yes. 10-year contract.
Yes. All right. It's like that After Earth movie with Will Smith and his kid, where the whole movie is Will Smith telling his kid what to do. That'd be what it like with Pete Carroll. He'd be at home telling his kid what to do the whole time.
No, they'd have Carroll up in the press box, but he'd have the headset on him, not in the coaching box. He'd be just there in the regular box. We're supposed to be just watching the game like the family is, but he's got a random headset on. We're not sure why Carroll's got a headset up there in the box, Bill. Yeah, I'm not sure either, Bob. He's not in the coaching box. He's not actually part of the deal, but he appears to be talking to the coach. You can see him here speaking as we cut down to the coach. Coach is speaking as well. They're having an active conversation. As father and son, Bill, just trying to get the good news across.
Right. Okay. I don't think we have to worry about that one too much, though. I think we're clear. I think we have been marked safe from any more Pete Carroll nepotism hires.
Yep, I think those days are probably beyond us at that point. It'll now be maybe Los Angeles Chargers issue to
Right.
deal with.
Right. John Paul C, thank you for the $2. Kind of insane we get rid of a legend for a big question mark. Well, it's always going to be a little bit, whenever you make any kind of a change, it's always going to be some kind of a mystery, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, change never is guaranteed for success, John. And you're right, 100%. Carroll, I think the things that we always got to say with Carroll is number one, legend. Number two, best coach in Seahawks history. Those things are true. But this is not a decision that was made based on anything having to do with Coach Carroll's legendary status. It was based upon where we've been at the last few years as a team. And it wasn't a reaction to simply this year, but years of where we've been as a team under Carroll here in recent years. And that the NFL is not a sport that a coach just gets to write their own ticket. It is a sport that has been this way for decades. This isn't a new thing where, you're at the end of the road as a coach. It's time. Everybody's saying it's time. It's time. You move on. And those guys are legendary. Tom Landry was legendary when they moved on from him in the Cowboys. A lot of people in Dallas got really angry at Jerry Jones for doing that move. How dare you move on from that legend? How dare you move on from this guy that got us a couple of Super Bowl wins? He should have wrote his own ticket. You should have let him have his own ticket. And then what happens? You bring in Jimmy Johnson, and then you have yourself a dynasty a couple of years later.
Yeah.
It's tough to move on from legends. It is, but legends do age like all of the rest of the folks, and they're not immune to that. And I think that is what has happened here. I agree with this, John. And the next hires not necessarily have to be guaranteed to be a success, but that we are on the road to be looking for the hire that will be the success. Or if this one is not the one, then you move on to the next one to find the one. And with this franchise's history, when we have gone down that road of truly trying to find the right guy, not just to simply sit on what's here, not to just simply stand pat, that's what's brought us the ultimate success in this franchise history. You didn't sit on Holmgren and say, well, he's a legendary coach here in Seattle. I mean, John Paul, Mike Holmgren is a legendary NFL coach. He was an offensive coordinator for the 49ers and won them Super Bowls. He got us to a Super Bowl. He got the Packers to 2 Super Bowls and won one of them. He will be a Hall of Fame coach, a legendary coach. But you, 3 years removed from having him taking you to a Super Bowl, said, Mike, it's been great. Love what you've done for us. You're a legendary coach, but you're not the right answer for us at this point. And you hired Mora, who was the big question mark. To your point on that, John, he was the question mark, but then you didn't stick with Mora in that question mark. You said, you're not good enough. We're going to still continue to go find the one that is. You found Carroll. Bam, you're back to that success. It's a little bit like the Landry to Jimmy Johnson thing on more of a microcosmic level. And that's why can't that same thing happen here again?
Yeah, I mean, ask New England. They're about to replace the greatest coach in NFL history with Jared Mayo, who was literally playing in the NFL less than a decade ago.
That's right. I mean, and what did Belichick win a Super Bowl? It wasn't 10 years ago. It was like what, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, he won a Super Bowl. This is what I try to tell some of the folks at times, and not you, John, but folks that Bristol that moving on from Carroll, is just that I understand the nature of having the affinity for him, and he's legendary and all that, but this is the nature of the NFL beast all across the board, not just with our specific franchise, but with universally all franchises, is that this thing moves much faster than other sports. It's not baseball. It's not basketball. This thing is always spinning quickly. And you got to just kind of embrace the spin of it a little bit, even in moments like this, where it's a little bit of a painful end, and understand that's the nature of the beast. The players are faced with this all the time in the shortness of their careers. And that I'm up here and I'm the best. And then tomorrow you're done with me like I'm 2-day-old trash. And we deal with it as fans with players. We accepted that part with players. Well, he doesn't have that step no more. He's not as fast anymore. But it seems like with Carroll on some of the stuff, there's a bit of hesitancy to recognize that same loss of a step, that same a bit of not as much at the height of my powers.
Right. Upo, thank you for the $10. Always love your podcasts. All in on Harbaugh. Give him whatever he wants except GM duties. Money can make anything happen.
Yep, that's my outlook on this as well, Upo. Down the line, I'm all in on Harbaugh. I'll do whatever it takes, but I'm not giving you general manager duties. I will pay you. I'll pay you the high. If I was Jody, I'll say to Harbaugh, I'll say, look, I'll pay you higher than anybody else out there is going to offer you. If you're offered 20, I'll offer you 21. You're offered 25, I'll give you 26. No one is going to pay you more than what I'll pay you. You're coming in an organization that's ready to compete right now. You can stick it to the 49ers organization for what they did to you before. And if you think that that's a silly point on my part and that that's not apropos, let us not forget, Coach Carroll and Harbaugh had their whole rivalry. Harbaugh reportedly had a higher offer from the Dolphins to go be the head coach there, as their Dolphin owner was an alumni of Michigan. Harbaugh reportedly turned that down in part, because he wanted to go to San Francisco, have the opportunity to give it to Carroll every twice a year. So there's a little bit of that inside Harbaugh. You know what I mean? Call it the competitor, call it the I don't other people would have probably more of a negative connotation for that bad behavior, but that is a little bit of something that could factor into this too as well.
Yeah, on local sports radio back in the day, back when Harbaugh was in San Fran, they would play a game. Every now and then it was they would read out a quote, and then people had to guess if it was a quote from Jim Harbaugh or the Zodiac Killer.
He's got some fun ones out there. He's like one of my favorites. Like, he told his players not to eat chicken because it's a nervous bird.
Yeah, he had this one quote that was like, I take the field to kill my enemy, crush the life out of them, squeeze them. It is my right to kill my enemy, but it's his right to kill me as well. And everybody got that wrong. They all thought that was Zodiac Killer, but no, it's Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah, that sounds almost like Conan, I will subdue my enemies and blah, blah, blah. There's a speech in Conan that's straight out of that too.
Yeah. Like, even independent of money, I don't understand the Harbaugh to the Chargers thing at all. I don't get that. Like, who wants to work for Spanos? Like, that's awful. That's such a bad situation.
Yeah, I was being told by somebody that they thought the Las Vegas job and that the Chargers job was more attractive than our job, or that our job wasn't the most attractive job in the sport right now. And, my opinion is it is the most attractive landing destination of any location because of the level of talent, because of the commitment that is there by ownership, because of the facilities that you provide. It's all of that. When you go to the Chargers or you go to the Raiders, I mean, let's just start from the fact that you have organizations that just arrived in these new cities in the last couple of years. I mean, what fan base do you even have there in either of these two cities for that team? That's number one. Number two, the state of those rosters. Yeah, while Herbert's really good and there's a couple offensive linemen that may be interesting there, there's also a defense that's gotten old that it's going to need a lot of help to get fixed, that you're going to have to make some determinations about some high-priced players about whether you keep them or not going in the future. I think their cap situation is not in the greatest of spots. I don't look – Herbert's really the one thing that draws you there. And then absent that, it's really not much else.
Yeah, that roster sucks. Eckler's washed up. Bosa's always hurt. Mack is pretty, close to the end here, and he's on some ridiculous contract still that they can't really wiggle out of that much. Asante Samuel Jr. looks like a bust. Kenneth Murray looks like a bust. Quentin Johnson, we're not off to a very good start. Zion Johnson, I don't know. They've got Herbert. They've got Slater. And that's
Keenan
it.
Allen's getting old.
Yeah, Keenan Allen's getting old.
They got the Michael Johnson, the receiver who's always injured.
Mike Williams.
Mike Williams. He plays 4 games a year and then he's busted up.
Yeah.
Another guy on a contract, by the way. You mentioned contract. You got Williams. Derwin James. You've got the Bosa deal, the Mac deal. Like, they're also not just sitting on like a ton of cap space that they're just sort of hanging out on. There's been some deals been given out on that team that have been, somewhat priced. Keenan Allen's making good money. It's good for Herbert's case, but there's some negatives to that going to that job as well.
Yeah, saying the Chargers job is better than the Seahawks job is defensible because of Herbert. I don't agree with it. I think that Chargers job sucks, but the Raiders thing, like that requires some serious lack of touch with reality. If you actually think the Raiders job is better than the Seahawks job, like, they have no quarterback whatsoever. The roster's like mediocre at best. I think it's below average. The ownership still sucks, by the way. I know it's a little bit better now that they have money, now that they moved to Vegas, but it still sucks. Like, what is in Vegas other than Vegas itself that is appealing to you?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Right. You've got 2 coaches, by the way, too, you're still paying money to that are former coaches. If you're talking about an ownership group that's committing to you as a coach, and for sure they'll let you instill their vision and they won't try to get itchy to get you out of town quick if it doesn't work right. Like, quite the opposite of what you've seen the Raiders recently. And I don't, that along with the roster being as thin as it is, to me, it's like the Raiders need to go back to Antonio Pierce for the job he did and give it a try. Give him a long contract, but that's as much as any deal that I would look at is trying to deal with where you see the Raiders in their situation right now, because they're not near, and they could use a guy like that can maybe find some motivation for those players in his approach. Maybe
For the
like catch
record,
lightning in
though,
the bottle,
for the record, though, I don't think the Seahawks job is the most appealing job right now.
which is the most appeal job.
I would say Atlanta. I love that roster. Arthur Blank is a good owner. They have a cap space. They're not married to any of their quarterbacks. They're picking high enough to get a quarterback if they want to. Atlanta, to me, is the spot right now. That is a great roster outside of quarterback. I love it.
It's a defendable position on that, as you just said a second ago. So I'd say that they're the same there. I think we would have them on a slight edge. They've got guys that are talented, but not always guys that are at that place of being productive. A guy like a Kyle Pitts that a lot of people will point to in that talent you're getting. And, maybe that Arthur's just not good at getting the talent out of that guy for whatever reason. But at the same point in time, he's not yet produced at the level people thought. And while people like Drake London's an 800-yard receiver this past year, and yeah, you're held back by the quarterback part of that, but that also does still mean you have to go find the quarterback as the coach coming in there too, in addition. But I'll give you that. They've got a good roster overall. They've got a great offensive line in place, which a coach is going to certainly find appealing, whoever goes in there. But yeah.
I will say this, everything changes if Jody's able to guarantee she's going to own the team for at least 5 more years. Then that ownership situation becomes more stable and it becomes a much better job. As of right now, I actually went through and listed all the openings and ranked them from what I thought was most to least desirable. And I gave us a 3 out of 10 in ownership, but that changes completely if Jody's actually saying I'm not leaving. So she's actually proven the last couple of days of her mettle. She's actually proven that she can do this, I think.
Yeah, I think we have to be, we always have new data. As I said, new data drives you into new directions. And the more data, the better. The new data has told us here succinctly over the past couple of years. And initially it didn't tell us this, but this is telling us this now, which is that she'll spend the money, number one. She'll make the hard decisions, number two. And this is really what your job is to do as an owner. Your job's not to come in there on day-to-day affairs and be in there meddling. Your job is to come in at pinpoint times and make incredibly hard decisions that then can allow the organization to find success. But it's the timing in those decisions. It's the brass balls to go out there and make decisions sometimes when there's going to be a heavy contingent of the fan base that may not be happy with that, like we've seen here, right? On the other side of this. Like, it wasn't like this is an easy decision for her where everybody's like, yay, Jody. You got all these people yesterday with the like, how could they do this to him? A lot of the pearl clutching, a lot of the, this is just shocking. This is almost without reason. She had to make that call and probably know very well that was the blowback she was going to receive by making this call. So indeed, I would say dedication of ownership. Yeah, I think it's there. To think that this team is due to be set to be sold in the next even year or two at this point, it's given no indication of that, especially when you look at the Blazers situation, which we have as a unique kind of, they're up ahead of us down the line, right? The second that they go off the cliff, we know the cliff's coming as far as the sale goes. And if they've not yet been sold, yet have been for sale now for a few years, it seemed to indicate to me that at the very least we're 4 to 5 years out. I told you this before Carroll was fired. I think she's looking to hold the team minimum to 27 and probably upwards of 28, 29. At this
point, I think that's the assumption we now have to make. Yeah.
Yeah. Agreed.
283. Thank you for the $4.99. Chargers job is like the expensive car outside the crappy house, broken down house meme. Yeah, that's a good meme.
That's a great meme. And that's very true. It is very true.
Yeah. I don't know why Harbaugh would go there. I really don't. I have to believe he would want to go somewhere with a real owner. Like even I would say Washington would be better than the Chargers. Like at least Washington might have good owners.
That's right. I mean, let's remember Eli Manning utterly refused to go to the Chargers because Spanos was the owner. That was the reason behind that. The Manning family were like, you don't select him. Don't do that because we do not like this Spanos guy. He's awful. No. So I don't know that that's changed just because he's merely gone from San Diego to LA. I feel like that reputation probably still is pretty accurate to him in the way he's viewed in league circles. And if that's the case, I wouldn't want to go there.
And I think he's going to sell soon probably, but that brings its own problems, right? Like new owners might want their own coach. It's not a good situation. I would not want to touch that if I'm somebody like Harbaugh.
And even in Herbert's case, right? Like there's still, as much as I love Herbert, and I wouldn't be minding having him here as a Seattle quarterback, but there's even with him, he's not just a slam dunk in himself either, where there could be some, he's had some issues and things within his game that haven't been the most perfect. And maybe that's all outside factors driving him. Dem Fed somebody head coach, not having a good firm mind, but yeah, Kellen Moore this year. But there's been some things with him as too about, concerns with him. So he's the best part of it still, no doubt about that. But it's not a slam dunk. It's not that that's just the easiest job, best job out there, no doubt about it. And a lot of reasons it's, maybe got some downsides to it.
Mm-hmm. Jeffrey, thank you for the member message. The national media hammering Dan Quinn down our throats is triggering me. Why hire the worst version of what you just fired? Please, no. I think that's a little unfair to Dan Quinn. I think he, at this point, is better than what we just fired. I suspect he is anyway.
I suspect he's a little bit better than fired, Jeffrey. To your point on it, we've made this hard move to go off of somebody that's here for 14 years. I do not see the added benefit to bringing somebody in here that's under that coaching tree to do more of the same, unless it was just a no doubt about it, no brainer. That guy's ready to go. This is the right time to do that. And I don't see that in this scenario with Dan Quinn. Has he done a good job with Dallas? Sure. He's done a good job with Dallas. Has he updated the scheme past Carroll? To Brendan's point, Jeffrey, that this is not the cover 3 scheme, or this is not the 4 2-man fronts that Carroll was running the past year in his approach to the position. He's more multifaceted, more multidimensional in what he'll bring from the defensive perspective. But it is a boring hire. It is lacking imagination. It is, for what you just made, which was an incredibly tough decision, this is sort of just the easy, lazy decision. And if you're going to be on the back and making a hard decision like that, don't sandwich it with the lazy and the easy.
Right.
Sandwich it with the hard. The hard of the hard, the hard find, the hard can to locate. That seems more succinct. That seems more in parallel to me.
All right. I think we've uncovered all the main angles from the last day and a half of Seahawks football, Seahawks news. It's a fascinating time to be alive right now. And I'm so happy that me and Brandon were able to hook up and discuss this for a couple hours tonight. Thank you, Brandon, for coming down, being
My pleasure,
part of this.
Brother. My pleasure.
Yeah, we had over 500 people in the stream tonight. We haven't done that in a long time, which I think speaks to the level of excitement that people now have about this team compared to before, because now it feels like different things, unexpected things are possible.
Absolutely. Where our future doesn't feel as set as it felt before, where it did feel like we were on more of a train track of where we were headed. And it was not a place that was going to take us to contending status anytime soon.
All right, so thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. I will be live on Twitch in not too long here, and we are finishing The Witcher 2. All we got to do is kill the dragon. Got to get that Kingslayer. But thank you, everybody, for coming out. I am excited for what comes next. I think a lot of you guys are too. Sounds like Brandon is too. We will be coming at you this whole offseason with the latest and greatest about this coaching search, what the coaching search says about the roster, what that says about the draft, what that says about free agency, and everything in the middle. I'm excited. And all that's left to say is the thing that we always say, but today it means something different, because now it comes without the things that have always come with that statement. It's not go Russell Wilson. It's not go Pete Carroll. It's not go any of those entities that we all knew would not be here forever. There is one thing that is going to be here forever, though. It's that logo. It's that team name. So let's hit it. Go Hawks.
Go Hawks.